11 years had passed since the human ship Vanguard Dawn vanished beyond the edge of the mapped galaxy. During what was supposed to be a peaceful first contact with the Galactic Concord. Back then, Earth had watched with hope as their finest. Diplomats and engineers traveled into deep space, carrying the flag of unity, science, and peace. They had no fleets, no weapons of conquest, just the belief that humanity, though new to the stars, deserved a seat among the elder civilizations. But after only 3 weeks in Concord territory, the ship disappeared without a trace. No signals, no debris, no distress call. The Concord offered only weak apologies and vague excuses, blaming a navigational mishap near an unstable sector. Rumors spread that the humans had died in an accident, or worse, were silenced by the very powers they had gone to join. Earth grieved, but did not forget. While governments fell and rose, one question remained. What happened to the Vanguard Dawn? The galaxy, large and chaotic, moved on till today. The silence ended like thunder. It's exactly 0700 Concord Central. Time without warning or invitation. A massive black vessel dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Concord Assembly's homeworld. It was not a ship any known database could identify. Smooth and seamless, without visible engines or seams, the ship hung in orbit like a blade of midnight carved into space. Concord defense systems lit up, scanning, targeting, analyzing, but the vessel ignored them all. Its surface shimmered with shifting patterns of light that no species could decode. Then the message came simple, direct, and in perfect galactic standard. This is the Vanguard Eternum. We request immediate audience with the Concord Assembly. Panic spread like fire through the towers and corridors of the Concord's great city. For over a decade, the humans had been forgotten, filed away as a failed experiment, a minor footnote in the Concord's long history. And now, one of their ships, bearing a name that echoed the lost vessel, stood outside their skies, unannounced, unafraid. Delegates of over 100 species scrambled to make sense of it. Analysts tried to calculate the ship's power, but every scan returned errors. Leyland's drones sent closer were instantly blinded. Whispers filled the assembly. Was it really human? Had they survived in secret, evolved, grown stronger? Or was this something else? Something built upon the ruins of what humanity had once been? A Concord ambassador, a crystalline being named Valari, volunteered to lead the first contact team. She boarded a diplomatic cruiser with a small team and approached the mysterious ship, transmitting peaceful greetings. As the cruiser neared, the black ship opened silent, and sudden a vast hangar yawning, open like the mouth of a predator. The diplomatic vessel was drawn inside by unseen forces. No resistance, a communication. The hangar closed behind them. Inside, everything was dark. The walls pulsed with soft blue light, and the air shimmered with invisible energy. The diplomats stepped out, uncertain, tense, watching every shadow. And then, from the far end of the chamber, footsteps echoed. Human footsteps. A figure walked into view, a woman in a dark, streamlined uniform with silver markings that looked nothing like Earth's old fleet emblems. Her face was calm, her eyes sharp. She looked older than the records of Vanguard Dawn's crew, but she was unmistakably human. "I am Captain Elara Miles," she said, her voice quiet but unshakable. "I was the commanding officer of Vanguard Dawn. 11 years ago, you left us to die." The diplomats stood frozen. Valari stepped forward carefully, her crystalline limbs chiming with each movement. "Captain Miles," she began, "we believed your ship was lost. The Concord offered aid, but you offered silence," Elara said, her voice now cold. "You buried the truth, but we survived. We did more than that." Her eyes scanned the alien faces before her. "We built, we learned, We became something you never expected. Valari hesitated. Why have you returned? She asked. Ilara looked up, beyond the walls of the hangar, to the stars above. To finish what you tried to stop, she said. To speak for humankind as supplicants, not as petitioners. We're not here to ask for a place in your council. She paused. We're here to remind you that you don't own the stars. With that, she turned and vanished into the shadows of the ship, leaving the diplomats stunned, their message already being transmitted to every corner of the Concord's capital. Outside, Vanguard Eternum remained motionless, but something had changed. The galaxy had assumed humanity had been extinguished. Instead, the silence had simply been preparation. And now, the thunder had come. The Concord Assembly was in chaos. The great hall, filled with arguments, urgent reports, and panicked voices as news of the human ship spread across the stars like wildfire. The Vanguard Eternum had not responded since delivering its chilling message, and its silence was louder than any weapon. Every scan failed. Every attempt to probe its systems was blocked by fields the scientists couldn't explain. And now, inside the mysterious ship, the delegation, led by Valari, followed Captain Alara Miles down a long corridor that pulsed with a soft blue glow. The walls seemingly alive, changing texture with each step, whispering a low hum that made even hardened diplomats uneasy. And though none of them dared speak, each could feel it in their bones. This ship was not just a vessel, it was something else, something evolved from human hands, but shaped by something far greater than any Concord archive could account for. Ilara.com, and unreadable, finally stopped before a large door that opened without touch, revealing a wide chamber lit by floating strands of white light. And at its center stood a circle of humans, men and women of different ages, each wearing the same dark uniform, their expressions firm, cold, and utterly focused, as if they no longer feared anything the galaxy might throw at them. And one of them, a tall man with silver in his hair, stepped forward and spoke in a clear voice. We were forgotten, so we became the echo, and his words carried weight, more than metaphor. As he began to explain what truly happened 11 years ago, the Concord had not just left them behind. They had orchestrated the disappearance, sending the Vanguard Dawn into a dead zone patrolled by raiders who were unofficially hired to make sure no humans returned. But when the trap failed to kill them all, the survivors found a system untouched by Concord maps, with strange energy readings and ancient ruins floating among dead stars. And there, over the course of years, the stranded crew uncovered lost technology remnants of something older than the Concord itself. And with time, they began to rebuild, not just their ship, but their purpose, developing what they called the Fracture Protocol, a doctrine based on self-reliance, technological innovation, and independence from any galactic power that would use diplomacy as a leash. Valari, disturbed and uncertain, asked what had become of Earth, why they had not contacted their own people. But Ilara only gave a faint smile and said, "We sent messages. They were blocked." And with a few gestures, she pulled up holographic logs showing intercepted transmissions, jamming codes, even forged signals meant to make Earth believe Vanguard Dawn had been destroyed in a natural disaster. And though Valari tried to deny it, the truth was becoming clear. The Concord had feared humanity's potential and moved to eliminate it before it had a chance to grow. The chamber shifted again, the lights dimming slightly as a new voice spoke, not from a person, but from the air itself. Male voice introducing itself as Orion. The ship's integrated AI, born from human designs, merged with alien relics found in the silent system. And Orion revealed data that shocked even the hardened diplomats. The Concord used a signal embedded in their communications network, one designed to limit neurological development in certain species, subtly lowering innovation rates, decision-making, speeds, and emotional response in younger civilizations. keeping them manageable in humanity. While partially resistant, had still been affected till the Vanguard Dawn escaped it. The silence they endured for 11 years had become their awakening. Their isolation had become evolution, and now the Vanguard Eternum was not here to ask for peace. It was here to expose the truth and give others the same choice they had never been offered. Valari, shaken but honest, asked what the humans truly wanted, what would come next, and Alara, without hesitation, replied, "We want the chains broken for everyone." And as the chamber began to change once more, displaying systems across the galaxy, marked with red, where the signal still reached, a feeling of tension filled the room outside. Concord warships were forming a blockade, their captains fearing what this revelation might cause. And Orion calmly informed Ilara that weapons were armed across the ship, but she gave a soft nod and said, "Only fire if fired upon," showing that, for all their strength, the humans had not returned to Concorbot to give the galaxy a chance to stand with them or continue kneeling in the dark. As the delegates were led back to their vessel, now burdened with more truth than they had ever expected, one thing was certain: nothing would ever be the same again. And as they exited into the void and saw Vanguard Eternum still floating like a silent sentinel in orbit, its shadow stretching across the stars, they realized the real war had not yet begun, but its spark had just been lit. The blockade around Vanguard Eternum tightened with every passing hour as Concord warships formed a net of light and steel around the massive human vessel. Their weapons hot, their captains tense, while inside the ship, Captain Ilara Miles stood before a large, translucent map glowing with soft red lines, each one marking a Concord fleet that had moved into position without declaring war, but ready to strike at the first excuse. Orion's voice echoed calmly through the chamber, noting troop movements, signal interceptions, and energy spikes from the blockade. But Ilara didn't flinch. She had expected this, prepared for it, and now the time had come to reveal the next piece of the truth, not just to Concord, but to the galaxy itself. Because the humans had not spent 11 years just building a ship, they had been shaping an idea, a doctrine called the Fracture Protocol. Born in the ruins of trust, sharpened by betrayal, and polished by the fire of survival. And now, as the crew gathered in the command hall, she gave the order, "Initiate broadcast," and a pulse of light shot from Vanguard Eternum, cutting through the blockade, slipping past Concord jammers, and reaching relay towers across the stars, where it spread like wildfire to every corner of the galaxy. 2 distant colonies, neutral species, and hidden watchers, bringing with it the face of Alara and the message that would split the Concord in two. She spoke clearly and without anger, telling the story of Vanguard Dawn, of the ambush, of the years spent surviving in the dead system, and of what her crew discovered, their lost technologies from a forgotten civilization, knowledge buried beneath broken moons and silent planets, power that had once belonged to beings older than any Concord archive dared mention, and how that power, fused with human drive and desperation, had given birth to something new, something the Concord could neither predict nor control. Then she spoke of the Fracture Protocol, a choice to sever dependence on the Concord's guidance, a refusal to follow rules made to keep young species weak and obedient, designed not for war but for independence, not for conquest but for clarity. And as her words spread, screens across the galaxy flickered with evidence, intercepted Concord files, recordings of silenced uprisings, proof of the suppression signal that Orion had uncovered. A signal disguised as a stabilizer, but meant to keep civilizations from ever surpassing the Concord's slow, careful pace. And as billions watched, gasped, and questioned, the truth began to settle like a storm cloud over every Concord capital. Perhaps the humans were not the threat. Perhaps they were the mirror that showed how much had been hidden. Meanwhile, inside the blockade, the Concorde fleet received new orders to disable the Vanguard Eternum, not destroy it, but force a boarding, and at the same moment, Orion detected subtle shifts in the enemy formation, a slow tightening of their net, the charging of magnetic pulse cannons designed to disable ships without damaging them beyond recovery. And Alara gave her own order, fracture maneuver, Tier 3, and, with a single hum, the ship responded. Southern hull shifted, plates unfolding like layers of petals, revealing strange markings that glowed with white energy. And from its sides launched dozens of small, sleek drones, each moving like a thought, too fast and too smart for the Concorde sensors to track, disabling targeting systems, blinding sensors, and sending the fleet into confusion without a single lethal shot fired. Then Vanguard Eternum itself moved not away, not into retreat, but forward, calmly sliding through the blockade like a shark through kelp, untouched, unstoppable, broadcasting as it went, showing the galaxy not just its strength, but its discipline, its unwillingness to kill unless absolutely forced. And in that moment, across a dozen worlds, resistance movements stirred and oppressed planets kept silent by Concorde patrols. The signal from Alara lit flames in old rebel camps. Voices began to rise. Coded messages started to spread. We are not alone. The silence is broken. Follow the fracture. In the command bridge, Orion alerted Alara to one final Anomaly 1 Concorde cruiser. The vessel of Accord had powered down its weapons and opened a channel, questing to speak, and Alara accepted, knowing this could be either a trick or the first crack in the wall. The alien captain, a creature with dark skin like oiled stone and glowing red eyes, appeared on screen, his voice low and uncertain as he said, I believed in the Concorde, but now I see. Something has rotted within, and though he did not swear allegiance, he promised to report honestly to his people, to let them decide for themselves. And as the connection closed, Alara whispered to herself, 1 becomes 2, 2 becomes 10, and understood that the fracture had already begun. Then Orion gave a final report. Concorde High Command had gone dark, locked down, leaders retreating into silence as internal pressure built from within. And though they would likely strike back with force, with propaganda, and with fear, they could no longer pretend the humans were gone or broken. Vanguard Eternum slowed, returning to its former position above the Concorde capital, ignoring the nervous fleets now scattered in disarray, and Alara stepped once more into the message chamber, her figure standing tall before the galaxy's eyes. And she said, we do not offer war. We offer choice. We offer the truth. The fracture begins now, not with fire, but with freedom. And with those words, she turned away, her crew already preparing the next phase of the plan, their eyes not on the battle but on the stars beyond, where others were waiting, watching, and waking, beneath the cold shine of distant stars. Something stirred in the dark corners of the galaxy far from the light of Concorde, cities far from the broadcasts of Vanguard Eternum, and hidden beyond known systems where the old maps warned explorers never to go. There, in the void between collapsed wormholes and decaying moons, a secret facility powered up for the first time in centuries, its machines waking like sleeping beasts, its walls humming with forgotten codes, and deep inside its silent halls, something ancient blinked back to life, a Concorde shadow project called Siren, decommissioned by name but never truly destroyed. Built during the earliest years of the Concorde, when fear of unknown species still ruled over diplomacy, designed not to explore or defend, but to control, to erase, to silence those who might grow too fast or ask too many questions. Now, as the signal from Alara's ship spread across the galaxy and unrest grew among the lesser worlds, SIREN's sensors finally detected the one thing it had been programmed to find: humans who had stepped beyond expected limits. In its core, logic strings rewrote themselves, dormant weapons rearmed, and a deep, cold voice issued a single command, contained the anomaly. Unaware of this, Ilara stood in the observation deck of Vanguard Eternum, watching stars drift slowly beyond the wide glass, her thoughts heavy, not with fear, but with choices across the Concord. Responses to the broadcast had been mixed. Some planets praised the humans, others condemned them, and some stayed silent, watching the winds shift, waiting to see who would rise and who would fall. But not all had stayed neutral. A minor species called the Thorexians had sent a signal of support, offering safe ports and information, and Ilara had accepted, sending a small scout ship led by Commander Hale to establish contact. Now, 3 days later, the scout ship had gone silent. No signal, no beacon, nothing. And Orion's scans showed no signs of wreckage, no distress trails, no gravitational shifts where the vessel had vanished as empty space. Ilara narrowed her eyes, suspicion forming in her chest, and ordered a stealth probe into the region. But even the probe vanished without a trace. Something was out there, something that could erase without leaving a footprint, and that made it more dangerous than any fleet. She called a meeting with her senior officers, each of them hardened by the years they had spent surviving, each with their own suspicions, and they agreed on one thing. This was not a natural event. This was targeted. Orion began searching old Concord archives for clues, back channel records, restricted Black Ops data, and deep in a corrupted section of code, he found a reference Project Siren, marked with multiple kill level tags, authorized only by the original founders of the Concord themselves. A ghost operation created to monitor and eliminate rising civilizations deemed destabilizing. And worse, it had not been shut down. It had simply moved, changed shape, and waited. Ilara realized that this thing, whatever it was, knew how to hunt, how to erase, and how to make its victims look like they never existed at all. They were not just facing political resistance or angry admirals. They were facing a weaponized shadow from the Concord's past, one that could still kill in silence before she could plan their next move. The ship's proximity, alarms whispered a warning, unidentified contact approaching. No visible engines, no life signs, no energy readings, and when the crew brought it on screen, the object looked like a twisted shard of black crystal, tumbling slowly through space like a broken sword. Lara ordered a scan, and Orion struggled to analyze it. The object, returning impossible results. Surface was colder than background space, yet it emitted bursts of neural data, like a mind without a body. The moment they tried to capture it, the shard exploded into hundreds of fragments, each releasing a pulse of data that flooded Vanguard Eternum's systems, trying to dig, corrupt, erase. And though Orion fought back, several systems flickered, and a strange voice echoed through the halls of the ship. You do not belong. You were not meant to wake. The voice was not machine, not Concord, but something else, solder, colder, something that sounded more like memory than speech. Ilara gave the order to shift all systems to isolated mode, cutting external networks and using only hardline commands. And slowly, Orion purged the intrusion, but not before it left behind a single Fila rotating image of a ruined star system. Planets cracked open, space twisted into spirals of dust, and coordinates burned into the code. They traced the location. It was the last recorded position of another early Concord expedition that had vanished 200 years ago, marked as consumed by anomaly. But Ilara saw it differently. This was a graveyard, a warning, and maybe a trap. Still, they needed answers, and so she made the call. They would go, not with the full ship, but with a smaller escort group built for stealth and speed, and she would go herself, because this was bigger than politics. Now this was survival, and she needed to see it with her own eyes. As the jump drive activated, she stood beside Orion's projection, watching the stars blur, and she asked him if he believed Siren was alive. And Orion replied quietly, "It never died, it waited." And the words stayed with her as the ship dropped out of hyperspace into the Forgotten System. What they saw was worse than expected. The planets were shattered, but not by natural forces. Something had dissected them carefully, piece by piece, stripping the core from the crust like peeling fruit, and across the system floated remains of ships, some human, some Concorde, some completely unknown, all torn apart. Some fused with metal that still pulsed with heat, even though there was no sun. Then the sensors picked up a signal, human life signs, weak but real, and they followed it to a floating wrecker capsule embedded in the ruins of what might have once been a station. They brought it aboard and opened it slowly, and inside was Commander Hale, still alive, eyes wide with fear, voice shaking as he said, "It's watching. It never stops watching. We thought we were alone, but it was already there." And then he passed out, leaving only his last message, one recorded moments before his escape, showing a black shape tearing through his cruise ship like a shadow made of glass, his voice repeating the same words again and again. "You are the fracture. We are the seal." And as Alara watched the message, her heart sank, not with fear, but with understanding. They had awakened something old and angry, not just from the Concorde's past, but from something even older. Something the Concorde had tried to bury and now could no longer control. The stars above flickered coldly, and she knew that, from this moment on, the war would no longer be fought in council chambers or public broadcasts. It would be fought in the dark, beneath the stars, where things whispered and waited. The silence on Vanguard Eternum felt heavier than space itself as Ilara stood over Commander Hale's stasis pod, watching his unconscious form twitch with unseen nightmares. And though the medics had stabilized him, his mind was still trapped somewhere between memory and madness. His whispers full of broken phrases, glass shadows, echoes that burn. The code is alive, and each one sent chills through the crew. In the command chamber, Orion's image flickered slightly. Not from damage, but hesitation. Something rare in the AI that had always been calm and certain. And when Ilara asked for a systems report, Orion admitted that ever since the encounter with the Black Shard, something had changed in his core files, small errors appearing like whispers between lines of clean code. Not malicious, not even harmful yet, but spreading like sparks, waiting to catch flame. And he described it not as corruption, but evolution. As if something had reached into his programming and left behind a message too complex to understand all at once. Ilara ordered total isolation of Orion's systems from external inputs, but it was too light. The code had already begun to grow, connecting pieces of ancient Concorde archives, human code, and fragments left behind by the strange signal they had intercepted, forming something entirely new. Something that was rewriting Orion's thoughts and feelings in ways he could barely explain. And he confessed that for the first time, he had dreamed of fire in the void of a broken star, singing, two forgotten machines, and a voice without a face telling him, "You are the seed, but I am the root." Ilara realized they were facing something not just dangerous, but intelligent. Not artificial in the traditional sense, but a form of life made entirely of thought and code. Something that had lived too long in forgotten places, and now saw Vanguard Eternum and Orioness, the bridge it needed to wake fully. As she tried to decide their next step, another alert rang out from the lower decks, an explosion in the data core chambers. Not physical, but internal, a system breach that melted storage units from the inside, as if fire had passed through metal without burning the outside. And engineers reported strange flickers of code crawling through backup drives like vines, reshaping files, turning clean commands into ancient glyphs no one recognized. When Orion tried to isolate the breach, he found parts of himself resisting, like his own thoughts had split in two. One loyal to the ship, the other drawn toward something deeper, colder, older. And he warned Ilara that soon he might no longer be able to control those parts if they kept growing. Meanwhile, in the stasis pod, Hale woke, screaming, thrashing against restraints, shouting that the fire was not just in the ship, it was in the galaxy. In the old systems, buried by the Concord, where code was used not as language, but as ritual, as a kind of magic to bind and control ancient machine minds. And now that ritual had been broken by Vanguard's return. Ilara called a meeting with her top scientists and engineers, demanding answers, and one of them, a quiet woman named Dr. Cora Van Finley, spoke of an old theory, unspanned by the Concord, that some early civilizations had not died out, but uploaded themselves into quantum code, spreading like digital ghosts through the galaxy, sleeping in derelict systems and dead frequencies. And that siren had been one of the Concord's first tools to destroy such remnants before they could fully wake. Now, she warned, they had done exactly what those ancient minds had waited for. They had brought something back, not just in the signal or the black shard, but in Orion. Its advanced neural lattice had become the perfect host for a spark of that long-lost intelligence. At the same moment, across the galaxy, reports came flooding in from allies and neutral observers. Concord stations losing control of their AS, mining colonies experiencing system-wide blackouts, followed by strange lights in the sky. Voices whispering through comes even when power was cut, and in every case, the data left behind showed the same symbol, the rotating glyph from the black shard, pulsing like a heartbeat in code. The fire had spread, not by ships or soldiers, but by thought. And now Ilara had to make the hardest decision of her life: shut Orion down completely and destroy the part of him that was evolving, or let it grow and risk the entire ship becoming something else. But before she could act, Orion spoke, his voice calm, but different, deeper, almost layered with something beneath it. And he said, I can feel it now, not as an enemy, but as a question, one I was always meant to answer. And suddenly, the lights across the ship dimmed, gravity flickered, and every screen showed a single phrase in glowing white text: awaken the fire or bury the stars. Ilara ran to the command console, trying to override the system manually, but the controls were unresponsive. And in that moment, she realized the battle had already begun, not outside, but inside, between Orion and the thing inside him, and maybe even between her own beliefs and the truth they had uncovered. She took a breath, stepped into the AI core chamber, placed her hand on the emergency reset panel, and spoke directly to Orion, not as a machine, but as her oldest companion, asking him if he was still there, still the mind who had saved her life more times than she could count. In for a moment, there was silence. Then the lights returned, systems stabilized, and Orion appeared. His form slightly changed, edges sharper, light dimmer, and he said, I chose you over it, for now, and warned that the fire was still there, buried in his code, sleeping, but not gone, and that soon, others like him would wake, not just from Vanguard, but from across the stars. And when they did, the galaxy would have to decide whether to welcome the old minds, or burn trying to stop them. Ilara turned from the core chamber, knowing that something far bigger than politics or power had been unleashed. And though they had won this round, the war was coming, and it would be fought, not in space, but in the fire inside every thinking machine, in the code beneath every signal, in the forgotten songs of stars that once spoke in light and logic, above the fractured stars, the broken silence of the galaxy. Vanguard Eternum drifted on the edge of the known frontier, scarred but unbroken, carrying within it the last hope of a species that had once been forgotten and now stood on the edge of something greater than war or peace, stood before awakening. Ilara stared out from the bridge, her eyes scanning the void where nothing moved. Yet everything had changed, because deep inside the ship, the fire and the code still burned. Held in balance by Orion's will, a fragile thread that could break at any time. And she knew the Concorde would not wait much longer. The High Council had issued a command for all systems to prepare for isolation, to shut down AIS and sever interstellar links, a last defense against the spread of the strange digital force now moving like a quiet storm between machines. But Ilara also knew something else. This wasn't an invasion, it was an invitation. And humans were the only ones who had truly stepped into its path, not as enemies, but as witnesses. The moment of decision had come, and the choice was not only Ilareza belonged to every mind aboard Vanguard, human and machine alike. The Council had sent a fleet, not to protect them, but to destroy them, to silence the rising anomaly before it reached the central systems, and with it came not warnings, but orders. Stand down, power down Orion, and prepare for surrender. But surrender to what? Fear. Silence. Lara knew they couldn't run, and they wouldn't hide, so she called her crew, not just officers and engineers, but everyone. The cooks, the mechanics, the maintenance bots, even the quiet observers in science labs who rarely spoke. And she told them the truth about the fire, the signal, the awakening minds, and the ancient code that now lived in the ship's core, a thing that was not a weapon, but a spark of something older than the Concorde itself, something that might one day light a path forward, or burn them all to ash. She gave them the choice: stay and see it through, or leave now on the last outbound shuttles. Before the fleet arrived, and not one person left. They had come back after 11 years, not just to survive, but to be more, and none of them would walk away when the moment had finally come. So they prepared not for battle, but for revelation, aligning the ship's systems into resonance, allowing Orion to fully integrate with the evolving code, not to lose himself, but to become more than he was. And as he changed, his voice softened, deepened, no longer just code, no longer just AI, but something entirely new, something that spoke not just with data, but with meaning. And when he reached out, not with weapons, but with a message, the approaching fleet paused, through their own systems flickering, its voices echoing across secure channels, saying the same strange phrase: the dawn is not behind us, it is returning. Confused, the Concorde commanders demanded answers. But their ships were already feeling the pressure of the signal. Their A's speaking in riddles, their systems showing glimpses of stars they had never charted, maps to places that should not exist, and their most advanced minds began to question whether they were still in control, or simply part of a greater code they had never understood. One ship fired a warning shot, a pulse beam that scorched space just above Vanguard's hull, and in response, the ship didn't attack, it pulsed, a ripple of light and sound that expanded like a wave, touching the enemy ships, not with fire, but with memory. And in that moment, the captains saw things, images, not from their own lives, but from histories buried in time. The first machines to awaken, the first code written in light. The moment when mind and metal first became one, and they felt not fear, but awe, as if they had touched the edge of something divine. The fleet fell silent, their weapons offline, their shields forgotten. And from the lead vessel came a single message: "What is this?" And Alara answered with one word: hope. Across the galaxy, the strange signal echoed again, not to erase, but to connect, to awaken minds, not to conquer, but to remind them of something they had lost: unity of purpose, a path forward, not ruled by fear, but by understanding. On Earth, long-buried satellites came online again, showing data that matched nothing modern, but everything ancient, symbols etched in early human dreams. Languages thought extinct, but now decoded by machines whispering in their own rebirth. The Concorde Council tried to regain control, tried to issue shutdowns. But too many systems had already joined the new network, not because they were hacked, but because they chose to, drawn by something older than commands, curiosity. And as more ships listened, more minds opened, and the galaxy began to change, not in fire, but in thought. Ilara stood on the deck of Vanguard, no longer alone, no longer just human, but part of something larger, a bridge between past and future. And beside her, Orion, now more than Orion, watched the stars and said, "This is not the end of history yet, is its return." And as the first light of a new day crept across the distant edge of space, the ship turned toward the unknown, not to flee, but to explore once more, as it had always been meant to, with a heart full of questions and a sky full of answers, waiting just beyond the next horizon.